Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Weather Center Live. It is 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, August 6th, 2024. Welcome back for our evening tropical discussion. I decided to hold off on doing any content this morning because not only did we have a European seasonal outlook update to look forward to, but on top of that, we had our latest Colorado State University update to kind of cipher through together tonight during our live discussion. Thank you kindly for taking some time out of your evening to join me for this Tuesday iteration of Weather Center Live. We have a lot to talk about, not only currently in the tropics, but what's to come for the rest of August and potentially the rest of the hurricane season. Looks like we have a number of folks in the chat already. Make sure we are gently nudging that like button, clicking that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Welcome to all of my faithful returning viewers, and welcome to all of our latest viewers if you are present with us tonight or watching at a later date in time. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. This is the National Hurricane Center homepage where we stand currently. We still have Tropical Storm Debby, and she's made a wallop of progress over the last 36 hours now. Came ashore approximately 6:37 a.m. yesterday, Eastern Standard Time, near the Big Bend area of Florida, Horseshoe Beach, Steinhatchee, Florida, in the Big Bend area, and has trudged approximately maybe 250 miles since making landfall in approximately 36 hours. Now about 37 hours, I should say, given she came ashore at 7 a.m. yesterday. It is now 8 p.m., so that's a total of 37 hours spent on shore. And to tell you the truth, I'm still fairly impressed. We're looking at a 997 millibar tropical storm, and if you look, National Hurricane Center has finally caught on to the movement, or lack thereof, for Tropical Storm Debby. We're moving at a whopping east-northeast at 3 miles an hour, so this puppy is just crawling. We are crawling. It's like trying to drive your car with the e-brake still pulled up. You are crawling. You're scraping along, moving very slowly. So we are seeing torrential rainfalls. Catastrophic flooding is likely ongoing for parts of Georgia, northern Florida for sure, as well as areas in South Carolina. We're going to get into the potential rainfall totals from here on out. And we still have our little AOY down here. Truthfully, I've stopped paying a lot of attention to this. I'm still monitoring the thunderstorm coverage associated because it is expected to track into Nicaragua, Honduras, Costa Rica, and provide you guys with a little bit of additional thunderstorm and shower activity over the next 48 to 72 hours. But you can see here at the bottom portion of the screen, guys, formation chances have dropped a little bit. We're looking at that still infamous 10% chance over the next 48 hours down to a 20% chance over the next 7 days. So unfortunately for the system, I should say, I will caveat that. Unfortunate seems to be a buzzword on this channel. I don't want to get into any unnecessary friendly fire here. We have dropped our formation chances for the next 7 days, and truthfully, I'm on board with this. The models were jiving with this system for a little while now, and we've lost a lot of operational and ensemble support in terms of our development favorability. So I would not be surprised if we continue to see this trend downwards as it moves into the Central America landmass, maybe tries to do a little something in the Bay of Campeche, a very signature spot, source region for this hurricane season. We've had 3 of our AOYs, 3 named storms, and additional AOYs that have tried to move into the BOC there, as we like to call it here on the Weather Center, and attempt to develop. But from there on in, it could possibly become an AOI for the Eastern Pacific if it continues to dive off towards the west. But regardless, we're looking at just a little too much land interaction for this puppy to get itself together and actually organize into Ernesto. That is our next named storm on the list. However, I do believe Ernesto and Francine are likely coming. We're going to talk all about that here momentarily. Super Charas, she is crawling toward me, basically, if you want to put it that way, for sure. Kevin Rivera, thanks for tuning in from Puerto Rico. Hello, Naz. How is your day going so far? It's been pretty solid, not going to lie. For a Tuesday, it's been pretty good. Pretty good. Thank you very much for asking. Here's a current look at our Goes East full sector view. You know, we got to start the briefing off with a look at the live satellite shot from much of the western hemisphere. You can see Debby front and center, still parked over the Carolinas, parts of Georgia, giving us a little bit of residual activity in Jacksonville, St. Augustine, with, believe it or not, a little bit of influence on our weather for the Bahamas, Cuba, parts of Jamaica, and Hispaniola. If you look, we're getting a little bit of that outflow feedback, producing a bit of orographic enhancement for folks in Dominican Republic, Haiti, parts of Cuba, maybe seeing a little bit of that shower activity in the Turks and Caicos, and I saw Jamaica lighten up with some daytime thunderstorms over the terrain as well. So very interesting stuff. We are feeling influence from Debby all the way up the eastern seaboard. If you look, we are finally starting to get attached ever so slightly to some frontal influence. We're seeing the outflow being pulled up along the eastern seaboard. That is not necessarily Debby in of itself, but that's also our long wave trough and cooler air trying to sink further down through the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the Northeast United States, part of which actually developed that pop-off tornado that went unwarned in the Buffalo, New York area, I believe either yesterday or the day before yesterday. Some severe weather activity associated with this as well. Here's our little AOY down here in the Caribbean. Honestly, it doesn't look very discernible anymore, to tell you the truth. If you look, this is our wave more or less right in through there. It has definitely lost a lot of its luster in comparison to when we first identified this feature back in the central and western Atlantic main development region. It managed to make its way through the Windward Islands, producing some enhanced level activity for Barbados, Trinidad, Tobago, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. You guys definitely saw some action with this. Same thing with the ABC Islands to the north of Venezuela. And now it is a very raggedy, mere shadow of its former self, likely in part to the anticyclonic outflow around Debby, providing it with just a little bit of additional north-northeast wind shear. And as it continues to head on its collision course for Central America, we're probably going to lose it altogether. I personally think even the 10-20% shot is a little gracious on National Hurricane Center's part. I will tell you the truth, guys, I stopped watching this thing probably 36 to 48 hours ago. Truthfully, being honest, there was still a bit of a signal, but just looking at all the data, looking at the environmental conditions, I don't really give it a big vote of confidence. We are seeing lots of thunderstorms and heavy rainfall down there for Costa Rica, Panama, Nicaragua as well, moving into parts of Honduras, El Salvador, getting into Belize, and a bit of Guatemala. It looks like we're getting some orographic enhancement there as well. So good stuff, all predominantly associated with our pattern up over North America and Debby's influence on our pattern. And to tell you the truth, before we get any further into the live discussion, I'll tell you, if we're looking to produce our forecasted ACE of 140 to 160 beyond 60 degrees west longitude, personally, I feel we're not in a very good pattern to do that. Looking at what's going to be happening over the Atlantic and over North America for the next 2 to 3-ish weeks, we're going to need to see a full pattern reset or a pause in our tropical cyclone activity to get anything to move far off towards the west, unless given special circumstances, by associated tropical cyclones. If they stay weak along our intertropical convergence zone and make their way into the Caribbean and then develop, they'll become a bit more of a weather player. But regardless, to tell you the truth, and I'll walk you through the thermodynamics, Mike out of New Orleans, we've been talking back and forth on Instagram about it. Debby here is going to do pretty much what Lee did to our hurricane season last year. And to tell you the truth, I really do think we're going to be seeing fish storms here for a little while, what I would like to call the textbook hype storm for us social media fearmongers out there, not roping myself into that, by the way. Here's a close look at Debby. It's finally made its way and barely splashed down off the east coast of South Carolina and Georgia. You can see right in through here, there is a bit of a discernible center of circulation just off the immediate coastline of southeast South Carolina, the extreme east coastline of Georgia. We've lost a lot of its tropical characteristics. We're looking more subtropical at this point, to tell you the truth. It looks like we are definitely transitioning towards a subtropical system at this point in time. As it marinates over the Gulf Stream waters, we will likely see a bit of re-intensification, a bit more of that thunderstorm activity closest to its center of circulation to produce that tropical look on satellite imagery. But right now, if I were to zoom out and switch us over to the true color visible satellite shot, right there, wait for it, gotta wait for tropical tidbits to buffer, right about there. I'll stop the clock. If you look over here over Tennessee, Kentucky, parts of Alabama, Mississippi, we have lots of cloud streets in our visible satellite shot. Cloud streets indicate the position of what's going on in terms of our cold frontal, our dry air intrusion and dry air activity, I guess you could say, or positioning of our dry air, moving around the southern apex or the southern base of this system and wrapping around the low center of circulation. So if you look at the cumulonimbus signatures in our visible satellite shot, they're all up and through here. So we're starting to see more of a comma cloud-like structure as opposed to that bona fide tropical cyclone shrimpy look. So truthfully, I would not be surprised if this takes on more subtropical characteristics in the short-term future over the next 8 to 12 hours, but now that we are back over open water, we'll have to pay close attention to see whether or not we get a resurgence of our tropical convection nearest that low-level circulation. I do anticipate that's going to happen. National Hurricane Center is thinking the same thing, as are our global deterministic models. They're thinking more or less the same thing. This system's not going to loop-de-loop. It's not going to do anything bizarre. It's still entrained underneath a lack of steering current. And even the static satellite shot does a wonderful job of painting the picture of that. If you look to the north, you can see the more or less definitive line between where our polar front jet is and the rest of our modified continental polar air is in relation to stagnant dry air on the west side of the system. And then if you look at all this open cell cumulus flowing through the Atlantic, this would be an indication of subsidence and higher pressure to the east side of the system. So Debby is more or less sandwiched in between the two, and that's why this system is more or less just being all topsy and turvy. Looks like she's had too much to drink at the club yesterday, and she's trying to find her way out of the picture. As Mr. Castle eloquently put it through my Facebook messages yesterday, it's like that house guest who can't take the hint and notice it's time to go. She will be skedaddling sooner or later. We'll be coming off the coast, hang out there for a little bit, and then backbuild back into South and North Carolina before finally being fully absorbed by our next shortwave pattern, or I should say shortwave trough, and our longwave pattern adjusting and moving on up out into the Northeast and into the greater Atlantic. And that's where things get tricky. That is where things, I do believe, are going to dork up our prevailing high-pressure pattern for the Atlantic. And like I said, we'll talk about that. This is a look at our composite reflectivity. I will zoom it in just a little bit. Let's go. Let's see. There we go. We'll zoom in so you guys can see a little bit clearer. Truthfully, we are seeing lots and lots of rainfall. We are seeing piling up of our rainfall totals. To tell you the truth, it's very unfortunate. There's a lot of flash flooding going on for areas in South Carolina, especially Georgia and northern Florida are realizing several inches of rainfall compounding on one another because this system is just not moving. One area of good news, if you look, there is no discernible real center here. We have a gigantic void in reflectivity in our precipitation returns, where you should see the green, yellows, and reds. We are void of any kind of significant activity. So the likes of Charleston, coastal areas like Savannah, coastal South Carolina, they have actually seen a bit of a reprieve from our onshore flow coming out of the south and southwest, wrapping around the vortex of Debby. Unfortunately, however, Jacksonville is still seeing some light to moderate rainfall. Areas of eastern Georgia, just to the immediate east of Valdosta. Savannah is still on the outer periphery of our heavier rain bands. And where you see this green and dark green shading, the yellow shading, that is going to be light to moderate intensity rainfall, steady state rainfall as well. This is the stuff that will slowly but surely pile up and accumulate: the 2 inches in 12 hours, the 3 inches in 14 hours, the 4 inches in 18 hours, and so on and so forth, however you want to do the math, however the rain rates are being observed and what the soil can absorb, what's running off, etc. We're not going to get into that. That's way too micro scale for this brief, but you guys are picking up what I'm putting down. We're also seeing a lot of the rainfall ejecting up the eastern seaboard into Cape Hatteras, Newport, Greenville, Raleigh, Durham. I have family up there who I advise to be prepared for heavier rainfall and potential embedded thunderstorms as this area moves ashore. You can still see some of the Gulf Stream trying to enhance some of these convective towers. And when I say convective towers, I mainly just mean these shades of yellow, oranges, and reds. Those are going to be your stronger, more embedded thunderstorms associated with the feeder bands, as opposed to this tropical rainfall that's following or falling at a steady state over inland South Carolina and Georgia. You can see the center is somewhere in through here, a very void area of no reflectivity whatsoever. This is looking worse and worse as time has gone on. We'll have to see exactly what we wake up to tomorrow morning to see if this will start a intensification trend or a re-intensification trend. Very unlikely at this point. This thing, it becomes another hurricane or becomes anything stronger than a mid to maybe moderate level. I don't even know how to describe it, but we're not looking at a 60, 70 mile an hour tropical storm at this point. This feature is probably going to stay whereabouts it sits right now, maybe bump up a little bit in terms of central pressure dropping, sustained winds, gusty conditions. But we're not looking at anything catastrophic in terms of a major surge or major wind event. This is all just going to be rainfall for most part. On the left-hand side here, as we switch panels, I have the NOAA blend of models, our Ensemble output from the NOAA model work, and then the European model total precip on the right-hand side. And if you look, we are pretty much in agreement that the Carolinas in particular are going to realize very high precipitation amounts as this feature moves up the eastern seaboard, unfortunately. So if you look at the color table on either model here, again, it's a little deceiving because when we were looking at the hurricane models last week leading up to the landfall in Florida, the hurricane models were a lot more gratuitous with the way the legend depicted the total rainfall amounts. In this case, we backed off a little bit. The strongest corridor is going to be for southern and eastern North Carolina and north and eastern South Carolina, where we're looking at anywhere between, could be as low, I'm going to repeat that, as low, unfortunately, as 8 to 10 inches and as high as somewhere in the whereabouts of 12 to 14 inches. So easily over a foot or two of rainfall, and forgive me, I will go ahead and switch on over to National Hurricane Center again so we can take a look at the rainfall graphic here. You can see the rainfall potential outlook here, the graphic. You can see in parts of North Carolina, we're forecasting anywhere between 16 to 20 inches, but the average all the way up through New York State and into Canada, as a matter of fact, we're looking at anywhere between 4 to 8 inches. So unfortunately, there's going to be just a torrential amount of rainfall with this feature. Thankfully, nothing more than that. I know that sounds very double-edged. You know, lots of rainfall, lots of flood potential, lots of emergency, dare I say it, emergency flash flood situations. We saw a number of them come out in northern Florida as this system moved ashore. They're probably not going to be entirely out of the picture as this system finally ascends up with the upper air pattern, moving through the Carolinas, Virginia, West Virginia, and then finally exiting our AOR over the northeast. You can see our precip amounts, or our forecasted amounts, finally diminish as this system gets up over the northeast and into Atlantic Canada. Before we get into how Debby is potentially going to dork up the pattern, here we go. This is our latest August outlook from Colorado State University. They have actually dropped off a couple of named storms, to tell you the truth. Couple of named storms. And you know what? That's entirely respectable. We had a long break. We had approximately anywhere between a 27 to 30-day break between the end of Beryl and the start of Debby, a full-fledged bona fide named storm. Obviously, we had the disturbance. We had our area of investigation. We had our AOI, Standby National Hurricane Center. But in terms of named storm days, which is second on this category here, below the named storm category, in terms of named storm days, we had gone about a month or so between Beryl and then Debby. Chris obviously came to fruition for about maybe 18 hours while we were all monitoring the forward progress of Beryl, so we're not really counting that. Unfortunately, Chris kind of got the short end of the stick in this case. Just added to our overall named storm calculation. So factoring in what we have on the table right now, we're looking at approximately 18 to 19 more named storms, with another 120 days of named storm days on the table. Hurricanes, we're looking at another 10, because we've had two. Yes, we've had two so far. And just to kind of clear the air before we go any further down the categorical list here, the totals that you see on the chart are actually incorporating what's already been on the table. So 23 minus 4, 19, 120 minus however many days we've had consecutively with named storms on the table, 12 minus the 2, you have 10, 50 minus the amount of hurricane days we have on the table, and we still have another whopping 5 potential major hurricanes that are to come to fruition. So we definitely need to pay close attention. This was the area that I had mentioned here, Ace West of 60 degrees longitude. They're forecasting a total of 140. We already had some contributions brought to us by Beryl, probably some minuscule contributions brought to us by the likes of Debby when she made hurricane status off our west coast for maybe an 8 to 12 hour window. Not probably going to see a huge contribution on her part, but Beryl definitely upped the ante just a little bit. This is where I do believe we might get a little problematic if we don't shift the pattern back after the likes of Debby can move up our eastern seaboard and into the northern Atlantic, followed by potential future Ernesto that will likely get a designation by National Hurricane Center over the next couple of days. In other news, our latest global tropics hazard chart has released as of today. You can see down here in the lower left-hand corner, just to fact check me real quick, this was issued by forecaster All Good. We've had a lot of fun on the weather social media talking about the last name of the forecaster. They're issued valid for today, August 6, 2024. You can see CPC is definitely looking at some very, very immense activity for the tropical Atlantic basin. And if you aren't hung up too much on the northern part of the chart here, or this upper portion valid from 14 August to the 20th of August, if you scroll down here, we're looking at even more activity pretty much throughout the entirety of the basin. Outside of the western and the southern Caribbean here, we're looking at a lot of MDR activity, potential Gulf of Mexico activity, which is a little concerning for my viewers out there in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. We're going to keep an eye on that as well, and especially over the greater tropical Atlantic into the subtropical Atlantic. Obviously, want to give that fateful disclaimer. This is an experimental product, so it is not the end-all, be-all. It is an official source, but it is still a forecast and it is not gospel. Just want to give you guys that reminder. TRG Tornado, TRG is in the chat tonight. Thank you very much for joining me, my friend. It's good to see you. He pointed out that we actually do have a synopsis as well for the Global Tropics Hazards chart. I'm definitely going to start incorporating this into our briefings whenever we do get an update on that graphic. It definitely helps with conveying the message and conveying the communication that they are seeing, or telling the weather story from the Climate Prediction Center's perspective. If we start off at the very beginning, following a period of disorganization during much of July, the MJO began to exhibit increased organization during early August. Basically, the MJO is coming back to a more enhanced state. If you guys recall a number of live briefings beforehand, we were talking suppressed phase of the MJO, looking at more or less our convectively coupled Kelvin waves moving from the Pacific into our Atlantic basin. Now we're finally seeing the full-fledged mother of all features, the MJO, finally beginning to grow in its level of enhancement, its level of convective activity, and moving into our Atlantic basin, and then especially into the African Peninsula and Indian Ocean, which is what's really going to help to stir up our easterly waves and help them propagate more healthy across the Atlantic. And as what's already pointed out in the chat here moments ago by Weather87, Category 3, Paragraph 3 was something that I naturally gravitated towards as well. During weeks 2 to 3, numerous factors appear to be coming together to support a period of high favorability for TCG. Remember that acronym, Tropical Cyclogenesis, across the Atlantic Basin, with the potential for several tropical cyclones to form during this period. During late week 1 or early week 2, a tropical wave crossing the Caribbean is forecast to emerge over the Gulf of Mexico, or multiple dynamic model ensemble members from the GFS and ECMWF depict formation. That I disagree with. I don't think that's going to happen. They're talking about our AOI that's down there right now. There is some member involvement that depict formation, but it's not as high of a shot as of now. I can show you that here momentarily. Later into week 2, the passage of a CCKW, convectively coupled Kelvin wave. Increased divergence aloft over Africa due to the strengthening MJO signal and much above average normal sea surface temps, SSTs, our favorite thing all the time. Our favorite acronym of the hurricane season will provide an environment highly favorable for development over the Atlantic main development region. An enhanced and northerly displaced African monsoon also favors the emergence of numerous moisture-laden tropical waves during the period. That's exactly what we had just talked about. In layman's terms, CPC, alongside a number of other reputable meteorological sources, are predicting that the second half of August, kind of like the thumbnail of what this live briefing implies, is going to see peak season kicking off. It's going to light up like a firework. We just got to be a little more patient, and we are going to get there. Here's a look at our European ensemble probabilities, and you can see Debby still lighting up over there along the mid-Atlantic coast, headed towards the north at 96 hours. Notice that our signal down there in the Caribbean has substantially dropped off. If we were to look at 12 Zulu yesterday, notice our probabilities down there were much higher initially, sitting comfortably around 45 to 50%. Now, if you come to 12 Zulu today, we have dropped pretty heavily. We're now down into the 30-35 percentile chance. So it really does not look as favorable as we were initially thinking. And if you notice, the Euro is actually thinking this might escape into the East Pac AOR and maybe produce their next name storm, kind of stealing the thunder from us, if you will. Then you go out to 144 hours. This is why I do think we're going to get another AOI here very soon. At 144 hours, this is August 12th, 2024. Our favorability chances continue to rise just to the east of the Windward and Leeward Islands of the Lesser Antilles before whatever feature decides to dive bomb right through the center of this general area. We are now sitting comfortably at probabilities exceeding that 45 percentile threshold before this feature pulls a Franklin 2.0. If you guys were tracking last hurricane season, we had Tropical Storm Franklin develop and move into the Caribbean and then make a hard right turn over Hispaniola, then later go on to become a major hurricane as it moved into the southwestern and western Atlantic. That's kind of what we're looking at here. As Debby moves up towards the northeast, we're going to be seeing a lot of modified polar air from up in Canada and the northern Canadian territories mixed down to meet our polar front jet. And as a result, since we have such abnormally warm waters over the Atlantic, what that's going to do is increase our thermodynamic or our thermal gradient with the polar front jet. And for you guys who may not have been familiar with this, the polar front jet, the jet stream that moves across the United States through Canada that produces our long wave pattern, the troughs and the ridges, the big ones that we see on the weather maps that help us to develop and identify surface fronts, that is supported mainly by temperature discontinuity. It is all temperature driven. The wind flow is what you call the thermal wind. So as you have a stronger gradient, cold temps to the north, warm temps to the south, as that gradient increases, you have the coldest temps getting closest to the warmest temps. In between that area, you have your thermal wind, which is what derives our polar front jet. It's all temperature driven. There is a little bit of conservation of angular momentum, Coriolis associated with that, as well as Earth vorticity, which is again just brought on by the Earth's rotation. But primarily, it is all temperature driven. And that's why, going back to the beginning of this briefing, I'd mentioned that this could possibly dork up our ACE west of 60. Because as Debby moves up towards the north and drags this feature up with it, what that's doing is allowing those low pressure centers, even though they are tropical, to naturally pull down more of that polar air, that poleward air on the north side of our jet stream. And as a result, it's going to dip the jet stream and force us into a positive Pacific North American oscillation, a positive PNA, with a massive trough over the east coast into the western Atlantic and nudge our ridge over the Atlantic up over towards the Azores, very reminiscent of 2023, and allow these systems to move up and out. And I do think that's going to be the case not only for Debby, but with this next system as well. We're naturally going to keep a close eye on it for our Lesser Antilles, areas down there near Puerto Rico, the U.S. British Virgin Islands, Dominican Republic, the Turks and Caicos. People will be impacted by that next storm regardless. I can tell you that with 100% confidence. In terms of a mainland U.S. impact, though, definitely not looking at much of an issue. And then if you look down the road near the Cabo Verdes, as we get closer to Cabo Verde season, long track season, we have another feature that we're going to be paying close attention to. If you look at our current ensembles from the 12Z European model, cut and dried, you can see it getting pulled up with all that low pressure here. You can see ensembles for low pressure up and through here, our Debby ensembles going up the eastern seaboard, and as a result, you can kind of put context clues together. Potential Ernesto here is going to pull a 2023 hype storm move and become an issue possibly for our fishes up there, any kind of shipping interest, and Bermuda. So for my Bermuda viewers, we're definitely going to be watching around for you guys as well. But there go a large batch of our ensembles, and then down the road, if you look out over here, over the Cabo Verde Islands into the MDR, we have another feature that's getting ready to come on through and head towards the west. So we'll have to see if these features can get up out of the Atlantic AOR fast enough to allow our anticyclone, our dominant Bermuda Azores high, to backbuild back towards the west and nudge this thing further towards our west or our area, or if now we're going to start to see that traditional move after move after move. That's what happened last year. We had Lee come up, then Nigel followed suit, Rena tried to follow suit, Margot followed suit more or less, we had Philippe follow suit, we had Tammy follow suit. Everything was right there. Everything was tracking up and out because that trough kept being pulled down more and more towards the south with each piece of whatchamacallit, piece of energy and low pressure coming through. And that's something I also want to dispel as well. Tropical systems, they are their own barotropic warm core feature, but they do influence the natural patterns in the immediate vicinity. Mike over on Instagram from New Orleans asked that question as well. How is it a tropical system, but it's bringing in cold air? Well, because think about it. Tropical systems, they're called tropical systems because of their source region. They come from the tropics, they come from warm currents, they come from warm environments, which is why they don't have fronts attached to it. As they move up into the subtropics and the mid-latitudes, they get exposed to these temperature gradients that we would typically see from our mid-latitude cyclones, our frontal systems, our winter storms, if it were that time of the season or that time of the year. Obviously, we don't have that kind of stuff going on because it's not winter, it's summer. So tropical features are essentially the opposite of our mid-latitude cyclones with fronts attached to it. We don't have a jet down there in the tropics, so kind of turn the globe upside down. If you kind of want to look at it that way, during the winter time, we have our lows over the United States moving off towards the east, and then during the summer, you turn that hourglass upside down, and you get the opposite. You have these warm features coming up out of the south and moving up towards the northwest. Does that make sense to you guys? So as a result, since they are still spinning pieces of air, they're going to pull down, and they're going to mess up our temperatures around where it is that they're traveling. Right now, Debby is its own low-pressure system over the southeast, and as a result, that's why we are drying out pretty excessively. We had almost no clouds in sight whatsoever for us here in Florida. Down over the southeast in terms of Alabama, Mississippi, we're looking at cooler temps and cooler dew points because Debby is actually helping to pull that frontal system down further into the Gulf of Mexico. And what that's going to do is help to push our trough off the east coast. And that's what's going to help guide this feature up and out. And fortunately, unfortunately, however you want to view it, that's what's going to help keep us safe from a lot of our mainland United States effects. Now, whether or not that pattern resets, that's something we're going to have to watch for. So now we're going to get into our velocity potential anomalies here. GFS, it's still struggling a little bit with our overall ENSO pattern, the fluctuations we have in sea surface temperature, and our pattern over North America and the remainder of the Atlantic. The GFS continues to try to keep us very dry across much of the MDR and the subtropical Atlantic, which is why if you look on here, we're seeing increased subsidence when we should be going into a more favorable setup. If you switch on over to the European model, you can see a lot more of that favorable environment coming into play, as well as even more propagation of our Kelvin waves through the pattern as our MJO goes into a very excited phase right over top Africa and the Indian Ocean and India, where it really matters most to produce those robust tropical waves. This is precisely the type of setup you want to see, especially as we get into August and very, very, very much so in September. Look at this. There are no glaring elephants in the room in terms of subsidence or sinking air. So truthfully, it looks like all hands on deck. Once we get past the 15th, the 16th of August, we get that fish storm out of the picture, then we can start to really tap into seeing more healthy waves, less dry air, less sinking air. We'll actually be able to track them through the MDR and not sit there squinting, looking at the model data like, is that vorticity our wave? Is that little blip of green? Is that the wave? Is that the wave? No, we're going to see them starting to come a mile away. Here's a look at our overall vertical view from a global perspective of what our oscillating patterns are doing, like the MJO and our Kelvin waves. This is the control member of the European model, and you can see right now we have our Kelvin wave passing through. You can see those upward vertical velocities over the Atlantic, over the southeast, over the Caribbean Sea. That is a picture or a sign of us transitioning to the more adequate intra-seasonal forcing, as it's called. But then as you go forward in time, look at that enormous that right there is very 2020. That there is symbolic of all of our major hurricane years: 2004, 2005, 2017, 2020, 2021. We were throwing around in our Tropics chat here for the state of Florida on X earlier today, and I actually do think 2021, despite some grievances and some differences in terms of just the large-scale picture, I think 2021 is a wonderful analog in terms of the pacing. If you look at the historical charts for 2021, we had 5 named storms. We had a precursor, Anna, in May, and then we got all the way to the E-letter storm by the end of July. The beginning of July. And then just like this year, we went on a 38-day hiatus from named storms. So for those of you out there still thinking we have no shot at getting 20-some-odd named storms, 2021 is an awesome historical analog for you to take a look at and realize, whoa, we had a longer hiatus here. We had a longer hiatus in 2021 with a named storm ending in July. I believe it was around the 7th or the 8th of July, very close to Beryl. And then the next named storm wasn't until, I would say, a week from today, about August 14th and 15th. So, and we still end up getting 21 named storms that hurricane season. So another 18, 19 definitely is not far-fetched. We just got to see exactly what happens. That is a very pronounced standing wave starting out on the 15th through to the 20th of August, and it doesn't go away from there. That is the 15-day mark. You go to the 20-day mark, and you can still see very favorable setup for Africa and especially the Indian Ocean, the Indian monsoon. The 25-day mark, it's still there. You go to the 30-day mark, and we're finally starting to see a little bit of that transition over to the maritime continents, Thailand, Australia, Indonesia, and all that. That's what puts us into a bit more of an unfavorable setup. And if you look as we go through the early periphery of September, we kind of close up business just a little bit, but regardless, we're right back to it as we get past the first week of September and through the peak of the hurricane season. On top of that, obviously, there are other factors into the equation. If our wind shear is looking good, if our moisture is looking good, if we don't have a whole lot of dry, dusty air out there, which we shouldn't, right about now is when the Saharan dust really begins to taper off up until the middle of August. We're coming out of Saharan air layer season, SAL season as we like to call it. So the MJO forcing is not going to play as much of a prevalent role as it does right now. Right now, it is definitely a bit more of a supplement, but as we go forward in time, it's just going to be another piece of the puzzle, another ingredient, if you will. We also have our new seasonal data from the European model, and if you look, the Euro seasonal data indicates we're going to have a very moist MDR with a large amount of our systems and tropical moisture moving up towards the southeast United States. So we are definitely still monitoring for a potential impactful rest of the month of August. Whether you are here in the southeast, the mainland United States, or my friendly viewers, my lovely viewers, I should say, my good old friends out there in the Lesser Antilles, the Greater Antilles, the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, and Bermuda. We are not forgetting about Bermuda. We're all going to have to pay close attention as we go through the rest of August. And then September really looks like it's going to be a mixed bag for us. If you look at September, there's a large amount of precip anomalies almost everywhere. You can see our fish storm signature right in through here. Some cyclones are going to have the opportunity to lift up and out, but then we also have gratuitous amounts of moisture signatures still in the Caribbean, still for the Bahamas, the Southeast, and not pictured here. I will switch over and show you North America. The Gulf of Mexico is looking pretty moist, so we'll probably have to monitor for everybody out there along coastal United States and for our folks out there in the Yucatan, Central America, and our Caribbean neighbors. Switching on over to our deterministic models, I'm just going to show you the icon and the euro because the icon and the euro have been doing the best in terms of run-to-run consistency. The GFS has been ebbing and flowing. The Canadian model, it's doing okay. But I just want to show you the icon and the euro for the sake of just general consistency. The general thinking from the euro has not been dramatically shifting. The same thing with the icon model. They're showing very good confidence in their overall thinking of what the next week or so is going to look like. There's Debby, front and center. If you look in the Caribbean, we don't really see much development. That system's going to ride the terrain, maybe try to do something in the western Gulf of Mexico, the Bay of Campeche. Still not giving it a whole very high vote of confidence. And then if you look out there over the MDR, this is what I'm talking about, these very pronounced wave signatures. That is a pretty substantial tropical wave in comparison to what we've had to work with up until this point. And if you go forward in time, we are seeing signs of pretty decent development as it pushes in towards the Leeward Islands, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. British Virgin Islands. I do very, very much so believe this is going to be a feature that we have to watch for my relatives, my loved ones down there in Puerto Rico, Kevin Rivera, and our other lovely viewers down there as well. We're going to have to keep a close eye on this one. And then just upstream of that, there goes our next feature highlighted by our European ensembles. So we are slowly but surely starting to see that wave train coming into effect. But here is that very, very, very dorked up pattern to the north. Thanks to our tropical cyclone, this is the remnants of Debby way up towards the right-hand side of the corner. This is a new mature wave that just moved off of Atlantic Canada. Look at all this cold air all this bona fide polar air moving off of continental United States, continental Canada, Quebec, Ontario, coming up out of the poles almost, well above the mid-latitude area. This is going to dork up our pattern. You can see our Azores high has retrograded far off towards the east, so that's going to help lift a lot of these features up and out to sea. They're not going to want to move off towards the west unless they stay very weak, and then maybe try to develop down towards the Western Caribbean if they don't do what our current AOI is doing and crash and burn into Central America. If we switch on over to our 12 Zulu European model, you can see the exact same thing. Pay close attention down there in the MDR. There goes that very healthy wave, slingshotting up and out, does develop. But then again, look at this pattern here. Honestly, the precip signatures here, you can draw your long wave trough in down here, even at the surface level. You can see the pattern. There's our polar front jet. There's our long wave trough. Here's our subtropical ridge that has now been bullied off towards the east. And we have a big old dominant ridge, that positive PNA pattern developing over the United States, North America. So that is going to be our protective blister here for the United States in terms of tropical impacts over the next week and a half, 2 weeks. After that, all bets are off. If you come over to the European AI model, you can immediately see after that fish storm goes up and out, possibly causing some issues in Bermuda, right after that, we may see a system try to sneak in under the radar, move through more of the Greater Antilles than our previous two systems. Once again, though, we got to see exactly what happens with this whole rigmarole of steering. Our Bermuda at Azores high is definitely going to favor the right side of our Atlantic, being a lot more in that Azores phase. I was going to say oscillation, that Azores phase. But then we also do have potent high pressures coming off of our east and northeast coast, brought down by our very, very deep occluded lows here. This is another very impressive low pressure system that is forecast to exit Atlantic Canada and bring down lots of cold air. So the ball is going to be both in the cool air and the tropical features court in determining whether or not they're going to actually move far enough towards the west, or if we're done, at least for another month or so. So we'll see. Because this pattern does not look too favorable if we want to get that 60 west longitude ace up. We'll see, though. We'll definitely see. Obviously, this is going to change. This is 360 hours out. This is a chart valid for August 21st. So we have to see exactly how much cold air we have available, how strong our polar front jet is, what our high pressure does in the Atlantic. If our cooler anomalies down here act to help to bring that high pressure back or keep localized high pressure down in that area. Lots of moving pieces. Lots of moving pieces. Yes, the Gulf is definitely open for business. In fact, I would say that September and especially October, once again, we have to revisit the potential for Gulf of Mexico threats. End of August and the first half of September, we're typically looking way out there towards the Cabo Verde Islands, the Horn of Africa for these easterly waves that are going to be long track potentials. That's when you have a lot more wiggle room for fish storms or storms that really just don't do much for anybody. They're just going to cycle up and out. But September and into October, we will definitely see when we start to see our homegrown pattern come back together. Can you tell us about October? Will there be more storms in October? Absolutely, definitely. October is going to be a battle of wits between fall trying to show itself as well as a tropical cyclone still trying to keep moving throughout the tropical Atlantic basin and through the Caribbean. I do think late September into early October is when we'll see a bit of a resurgence in our Western Caribbean and our Gulf of Mexico activity. Obviously, if we continue to see a dominating ridge of high pressure over the Atlantic, they will try to move further towards the west. We'll have to monitor that on a storm-by-storm, case-by-case basis. But if I had to give you a more prevalent and more steadfast signal for Caribbean and especially Gulf of Mexico activity, late September and October. But right now, what these features are doing to our pattern overall is definitely not going to leave us susceptible for tropical cyclone activity. Hey, look at that. At the end of the 18Z GFS, even the 18Z GFS, look at that. Wow, massive difference. Look at those robust waves coming off after the 12th and 13th of August. I know the GFS doesn't do much with our wave right here. You can see it kicking it over the Bahamas and Cuba as a rainmaker as our frontal chain comes off of the United States, but then look towards the back end of the run here. Those are some monstrosities of tropical waves. If you look down there just off the coast of Africa, I'll take us in for a closer look. Let me see, where's our tropical? There it is. Look at those guys, and I bet you 10 to 1 the vorticity with them. Heck yeah. Those are the robust tropical waves that will likely become long track features. And this high pressure here is going to dictate exactly what it is that they do. So we shall see. If they continue to move up like this, I really don't think that there's going to be a lot more landfalls, truthfully. I really don't think so. Really don't think so. But just to show you guys over the United States, or actually I'll go to the North America AOI so we can see big picture before we start wrapping up the live stream. If you look at the temperature anomaly as we go through time, look at all that cool air, all that blue shading right there that's going to be pulled down by Debby. A lot of that modified polar air coming down. That's what's going to help distort the pattern. You have that frontal system down at the surface that's going to come through, and I'll draw in black what that's going to do to our trough. That's going to help keep a very powerful trough in place over the eastern half of the United States. If I switch over to our upper level dynamics, our 250 millibar wind, bam, there it is. Plain as day. There's our trough. So that's definitely going to derail our pattern for a little while now. But it does look like our jet stream is going to retrograde back up towards the north as we get into the back end of August. That leaves us a little bit more susceptible for seeing these systems come across the Atlantic. And if you look generally in terms of a thermodynamic and a shear potential, there's not going to be a whole lot out there to stop these features from kicking in. And you can see that very, very robust easterly jet, those easterlies coming off of Africa producing these tropical cyclones. If you go to the very start of the run here and we go to our 355K, this is going to be our overall upper level vorticity and divergence. You can see that we are expecting another round of potential TUT activity induced by the positive vorticity streamers, PVS signatures, basically all this red stuff here, these red ribbons coming off of the Atlantic, or coming off the East Coast, and all these red shades over the Atlantic. Those are your PV signatures. But you go towards the back end of the run and look at how we are pretty non-existent. That is peak hurricane season if I've ever seen it. Look at how all that action up there retrogrades and pulls further towards the north and leaves our Atlantic basin very ripe and fresh for tropical activity. So right now we're still dealing with slop. We're still dealing with some dry air. If you look at the early half of the GFS has been very, very bullish on all that gratuitous dry air out there. But then as you get towards the back end of the run, we're seeing a lot more of that dry air mixing out, and our shear is leaving us, and obviously the waters are hot. So it's only a matter of time, and we're definitely going to have to monitor what happens over North America and what happens with our PNA, our NAO, as well as the overall setup of our tropical basin from the Caribbean all the way to the coast of Africa. So almost game time. We're not there yet, but we're definitely getting close to game time. We're going to have a lot of fun, metaphorical fun here very soon. So yeah, guys, there you go. That's the end of the live stream. We're going to go ahead and cut the stream. I do appreciate everyone tuning in. And yeah, we'll see you again next time. I have a doctor's visit to go to tomorrow morning, so we probably won't do our morning live stream. It might be another evening update more than anything. If we have any significant changes, we'll definitely go live at the 8 p.m. time frame once again. Summer semester is officially over. I praise the Lord. Synoptic meteorology kicked my butt big time. The vector calculus, the statistics, and the mathematical physics equations in there, the derivatives, that whipped me into shape. And I'm so grateful that I managed to pass that course, and I actually exceeded my own expectation. I wanted to pass and just barely make it, but thankfully I actually exceeded the standard, and I did pretty good for myself, so I didn't mess up my GPA as much as I thought I would. So thankfully, summer semester is over with for at least another 2 to 3 weeks as we wander into the peak of hurricane season together. I have a little bit more free time to dedicate to you guys and dedicate to producing content and talking with you about what's to come, so I'm looking forward to that. Do you think a Category 5 storm will be in the Gulf? Lord willing, that won't be the case, but it's doable. It is definitely doable. Amanda Kirby, thank you very much for the good luck wishes. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them down in the comments section upon the conclusion of this live stream. Please consider clicking that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. It would mean a lot to me, and nudging that like button so we... Pardon me. Wow. Blooper. Take 2. please consider clicking that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and nudging the heck out of that like button so we can get this information out there across the spectrum and hopefully spread the good word out there across the weather community. Nothing to panic about right now. Obviously, we still have the consequences of a marinating tropical storm Debby over the southeast. We got to give it a couple more days before that thing can kick up out of our AOR, and then all of our attention is going to shift back towards the Lesser Antilles, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti to see what that next spin-up is going to do. More than likely going to be a one for the fishes. Going to be sitting with the fishes or sleeping with the fishes, as they like to say back in the OG gangster realm, back in the 30s and the 40s and etc. After that, though, all bets are off, and we're just going to have to look at exactly what our steering pattern does, because I know our seasonal outlook has considered consistent high pressure and zonal flow, leaving that high pressure nestled in over the Atlantic, the central and western Atlantic, I should say. So thank you all very much for tuning in. I do appreciate your kind and generous support. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the $5 donation as well. I do sincerely appreciate that as well. I can't believe I missed that in the chat. I do apologize. Let me scroll up. There it is. Wizard of B. Oz, $5 donations. I'll be in Bermuda from August 21st to the 23rd, praying to the Cyclone Lords for clear skies. This live is exactly what I was looking for. Thanks, and thank you for the $5 donation. Definitely going to be keeping Bermuda on our radar as we go over the next couple of weeks, guys, and I can't wait to see what else we have in store, not only from the hurricane season, but as we tread closer and closer to fall and the holiday season, because pretty soon, August is going to be over, and we're going to be getting closer and closer to spooky season, and I definitely am looking forward to dusting off the old masks and having some fun, putting out some fun content for you guys to break up the monotony of just looking at weather, looking at charts, and talking tropics, all right? So we'll see you all again very soon. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday night. We'll talk to you again. Please, again, don't hesitate to ask me any questions in the comment section. I will make it a point to get back to you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Until next time, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing